The student worked 2 jobs to support her disabled brother. But her world collapsed when she discovered his wheelchair left at the entrance of a luxury skyscraper. Sometimes life gives you lemons that are unsuitable for lemonade. Then you have to find a way to prevent desperation from squeezing the juice into your eyes. In the gray, dusty alleyways of the slums, where every day seemed a carbon copy of the last, the lives of Elizabeth and Michael paced to the rhythm of the wheelchair's wheels. Michael spent most of his time in this wheelchair, looking at a world that never learned to accept him. It all began the day their mother, in the last months of her pregnancy and completely consumed by her habits, barely noticed her condition. Michael was born prematurely with serious diseases that defined his entire path. Elizabeth was raised in the shadow of her brother's illness from childhood. As long as she could remember, she knew her task was to take care of Michael. She grew up to the sounds of squeaking wheelchair wheels and the smell of medical drugs, which were their daily reality. Michael was born with a rare genetic disease, tibiofibular phocomelia, which doomed him to life in a wheelchair. Besides this, he had a complex heart defect that required regular medical intervention. By a special provision, he was able to undergo heart surgery, and that was why he was still alive. But as for his legs, or rather, what they were, there was no fixing them. They just ended below the knees. Surprisingly, against all statistical probabilities and medical predictions, Elizabeth was completely healthy. Despite their mother continuing to drink during pregnancy and rarely coming home sober, Elizabeth did not inherit any visible genetic diseases. It was almost a miracle, a bright ray in their dark everyday life. The children were raised in a home where the mother only occasionally remembered her duties when pensions or benefits required her participation. One day, Elizabeth witnessed her mother, without a second thought, spend part of the money intended for Michael's medication on another bottle of cheap wine. The little girl remembered that day as the beginning of the end of their childhood illusions of a caring parent. Since then, she promised herself that her brother would never be left without necessary help. Working in the evenings at a local cafe after school, she earned money for the medications that kept her brother relatively safe from the next attack. Sometimes, at night, tired after a day of study and work, she lay listening to the quiet breathing of Michael in the next bed and wondered what awaited them ahead. Was it fair? Why did their mother care so little about her children? Why did they have to suffer because of her mistakes? But in Elizabeth's heart lived not only pain, but also hope, the hope that one day they would be able to escape this grim place. These nightly reflections intertwined with dreams of a future where Michael could walk, run, and play like all normal children. Elizabeth imagined him walking to his graduation, not in a wheelchair, but on his own feet, proudly meeting the admiring glances of his classmates. These dreams gave her the strength to continue her daily struggle. For Michael, Elizabeth was more than just a sister. She was his support, his beacon in the fog, his shield from the merciless world that so rarely showed him compassion. Her warm presence in his life was a constant reminder that even in the darkest times, a source of light can be found. Elizabeth always told Michael that their life was a trial they had to endure. "We are making lemonade," she whispered to him as she tucked him in after a long day. But deep down, she knew these lemons were impossibly sour. Through the sparse curtains of the decrepit window, the first light of morning penetrated, illuminating their small, cluttered room. In the corner, on a small bed, lay Michael, his peacefully sleeping face a reminder that in dreams he was free from pain and limitations. Next to him on the floor, Elizabeth slept curled up on an old mattress. Their mother, as usual lately, had not come home to stay the night. Michael woke up first. He slowly opened his eyes, squinting at the bright light. Lifting his head, he stared at his sleeping sister. He knew how much she did for him, how tired she was, how each day brought her new trials. But today, he wanted to do something himself, though he understood his limitations. Carefully, trying not to wake Elizabeth, he moved his hands to the wheels of his wheelchair. He began to slowly and quietly move it towards the kitchen. Each movement was a challenge, but he was determined to prove that he could do something on his own. In the kitchen, he stopped at the table where their mother had left a few pieces of yesterday's bread and some remnants of margarine. Struggling to reach one piece, Michael tried to spread the margarine on it. His hands trembled, and the knife nearly slipped, but the boy concentrated all his strength and completed the task. When Elizabeth woke up and entered the kitchen, she saw Michael sitting proudly in front of his work. Tears of joy and pride instantly appeared in her eyes for her brother's small, yet so significant, victory. "Did you do this yourself?" she asked, approaching him and hugging his shoulders. "I wanted to surprise you," Michael quietly replied, his voice trembling with excitement. This moment was filled with pure love and understanding. Elizabeth realized how important it was for Michael to feel useful and capable of independent action. She sat down next to him and took his hand in hers. "You made me the best breakfast in the world," she said, smiling through her tears. That day showed both of them that, despite all the difficulties, there was much good to come. Michael fell asleep that night with a smile on his face, knowing that even in a helpless childhood, one could find the strength for small victories. Since then, he had ceaselessly believed that even amidst the gray monotony of daily life, punctuated by struggles and hardships, there were flashes of unexpected happiness. And another such day came very soon. Elizabeth, as usual, was returning home after a tiring shift at the cafe. Tired, yet unshaken, she walked past rows of dilapidated buildings that seemed to become more abandoned and melancholic each day. But something was different today. At the threshold of their home, old Mrs. Clark was waiting for her. This woman, always stern and busy with her own affairs, looked unusually agitated today. "Elizabeth, dear, you need to come with me right away," Mrs. Clark said sternly, grabbing the girl by the hand. Somewhat startled, Elizabeth allowed herself to be led away. They approached Mrs. Clark's house, which always stood out for its neatness and order against the backdrop of the shabby facades of nearby homes. Upon entering, Elizabeth saw that a group of people was sitting in the living room, including local chefs, doctors, and even a couple of teachers. "We've all gathered here to discuss how we can help you and your brother," Mrs. Clark began, and the room filled with warm smiles and nods. Elizabeth was astonished. She had never thought that any of the neighbors noticed their dire situation, let alone offer help. The local child protection services had diligently avoided checking on this family, and multiple calls to the police and welfare agencies had never yielded results. Among those gathered was Dr. Allen, a local physician, who offered free consultations and examinations for Michael. "We all pitched in and collected some money," said Mr. Foster, the owner of a small grocery store. He handed Elizabeth an envelope, which, to her surprise, was quite heavy. "This will help cover the costs of medications and perhaps even some improvements in the home." Particularly touching was the offer from Mrs. Green, an elementary school teacher, who proposed to organize homeschooling for him. "I spoke with the school principal, and we decided that we could arrange homeschooling for Michael. I personally will take charge of his education and come to your home several times a week. We will also connect him to online lessons so he can interact with other students and not feel isolated," she explained. Elizabeth felt her eyes fill with tears. She could never have imagined that such attention and support were possible. Gathering her courage, she said, "I don't know how to thank all of you. This is just incredible." "You're not alone, dear," Mrs. Clark said softly, embracing Elizabeth. "We're here to help each other. And we'll be by your side, no matter what." For Michael, the first day of homeschooling was exciting. Instead of a traditional school classroom, his living room became his classroom, and instead of noisy classmates, there was the silence of his own home, only broken by the clicks of the keyboard and the soft voice of Mrs. Green, who arrived at their home precisely at 9 in the morning. Mrs. Green, an experienced elementary school teacher, was full of enthusiasm and belief in Michael's success. She had prepared everything necessary: textbooks, a tablet for accessing online resources, and various educational aids. "We'll start with some basic subjects," she explained, setting up the laptop in front of Michael. "Math, reading, and a bit of science basics. Are you ready?" Michael nodded, somewhat uncertainly. He was accustomed to new beginnings often being accompanied by difficulties, but this time something was different. Mrs. Green started the lesson with simple math problems, which gradually became more complex. To her surprise, Michael began solving them with unexpected ease. His ability to absorb information and apply it practically exceeded all her expectations. "Michael, you're doing wonderfully," Mrs. Green couldn't hide her admiration. "You learn very quickly." "That's fantastic." Michael smiled, feeling a surge of confidence. Each correct answer added to his strength and desire to learn more. With each passing minute, he became more immersed in the learning process, forgetting about his physical limitations. Elizabeth, who was watching the first lesson from the kitchen, felt pride for her brother. Her eyes filled with tears of joy as she saw him come alive, becoming more confident and happier by the minute. Months passed, and with each lesson, Michael increasingly revealed his abilities. When Mrs. Green moved on to scientific disciplines, it became clear that Michael was an incredibly gifted and clever child. His diligence and perseverance became his legs, helping him move towards a bright and hopeful future. Graduation day at school is always filled with excitement, but for Michael and Elizabeth, this day was special. Michael was finishing school with honors, surpassing many of his classmates in performance. His achievements were even more impressive considering all the obstacles he had overcome. Elizabeth helped Michael get ready, ensuring his clothes and wheelchair looked impeccable. She knew how important this day was for him and wanted him to feel confident. They arrived at the school, where graduates and their families had already gathered. The anticipation in the air mixed with whispers and glances towards Michael. When the time came for the diplomas to be handed out, Michael prepared to roll out to the stage. For a moment, silence fell in the hall, followed by murmurs. Some classmates and their parents shamefully averted their gazes, not understanding how a boy who had spent his life in a wheelchair could outperform them academically. This bewilderment caused them discomfort. They could not understand why they, healthy and without visible obstacles, had not achieved the same. As Michael approached the stage, he felt the gazes on him, sensing the unspoken question hanging in the air. Elizabeth, standing to the side, felt the tension too. She knew how hard he had worked to prove that his disability did not limit his intellectual abilities. When the school principal handed Michael his diploma, he made a special note: "Michael has shown us that success does not depend on physical abilities. His efforts and determination are an example for us all." The applause that followed was loud, but for Michael, it sounded ambiguous. Returning to his seat with his diploma in hand, Michael felt mixed emotions. On one hand, he was proud of his achievements. On the other, he acutely felt the divide between himself and the others. Elizabeth, approaching him, squeezed his hand tightly. "I'm so proud of you, Mike. It doesn't matter what they think or say. You did it, and that's what matters." The evening of the graduation slowly turned into a quiet night. Michael and Elizabeth sat in their modest living room, surrounded by the soft light of a table lamp, talking about the future. The air was thick with the sense of change, and each word spoken in the silence seemed more significant than usual. "We're on the threshold of something new, Mike," Elizabeth began, trying to hide her excitement. "You've graduated with honors. Now, doors are opening for you that we could only dream of before." Michael, staring at the dimly lit window, nodded, but his gaze was thoughtful and somewhat worried. "I know, but..." "Elizabeth, it's not just my doors. It's our doors. I don't want to make any decisions without you." Michael had never planned to go to university. He felt that attending a higher education institution wasn't for him, for someone society labeled as disabled. But Elizabeth had a different view. She saw in him not a disabled person but a talented, intelligent individual who deserved more than a life confined within the four walls of their modest home. Her persistence and belief in his capabilities always made him reconsider his views. When Elizabeth finished school, she reached adulthood and immediately took steps to obtain official guardianship over Michael. It was a responsible move that allowed them to break free from their neglectful mother, whose presence had long become merely a formality. From the moment the guardianship was formalized, their lives gained new meaning and direction. Now, standing at the threshold of adult life, they decided together to build their future. Michael, we both know you're capable of more. Let's apply together. You've always wanted to do something that really matters. Information technology is our future, and yours too, Elizabeth persuaded him. Michael, feeling his sister's support and belief, could not disagree. Their eyes met, and he saw in hers not only love and care but also sincere faith in his abilities. That was all he needed to make a final decision. They chose the Information Technology Department at one of the city universities. Both submitted their applications, and thanks to the university's provisions for inclusion, Michael was accepted as a disabled student with excellent grades, and Elizabeth as his guardian who matched her brother in knowledge. The air was filled with the tremor of anticipation and the light scent of autumn as Michael and Elizabeth headed to the university to finalize their enrollment. This university was known for its support program for students with special needs, and they both felt they were on the threshold of a new life, a life that would finally offer them a chance to realize their ambitions and dreams. They were amazed by the scale and beauty of the university campus. Historic buildings, modern laboratories, green lawns, and students rushing to lectures all created an atmosphere of vibrant and active life that Michael and Elizabeth were eager to join. They were particularly impressed by the adapted pathways and ramps that allowed Michael to move around easily. Their first stop was the admissions office, where a disability services staff member was already waiting for them. Elizabeth felt a bit tense, as a lot depended on this meeting. They discussed the accessibility of educational programs, the possibility of living in a dormitory equipped for Michael's needs, and the financial support the university could offer. The university employee was extremely friendly and professional, assuring them that the university did everything possible to ensure every student's success, regardless of physical capabilities. Here, you will not only be supported but also provided with everything necessary for comfort and success in your studies, she reassured them. After filling out all the forms and discussing all the details, Michael and Elizabeth left the admissions office building feeling a bit lighter. They walked past the library, where students sat with laptops, and the sports complex, where a basketball practice was taking place. Every piece of this place seemed infused with the spirit of aspiration and achievement. Having finished touring the campus, they paused for a moment, looking at each other with an unspoken question in their eyes. Elizabeth took Michael's hand. "Do you think we made the right choice?" she asked, her voice trembling with excitement. Michael smiled. "I think so. This place seems exactly what we need. A new beginning. A new chapter." Michael and Elizabeth were provided places in a student dormitory equipped with all the facilities for people with disabilities. The first week in the dormitory was full of excitement and discoveries. Michael had to get used to a new routine, where he needed to independently plan his day, from studying to personal hygiene and meals. Ramps, wide doors, specially equipped elevators, and bathrooms all made his life here more comfortable and allowed him to feel more independent. He learned to skillfully maneuver his wheelchair through ramps, which had once seemed an insurmountable obstacle. Using the elevator became routine for him, and he no longer felt the uncertainty that had engulfed him when he first tried it. One significant achievement for Michael was that he managed to approach the university's administrative department with a request for a laptop to use during his studies. This was his own request, made without any external help, which became a symbol of his newfound independence. Receiving the laptop significantly simplified his study process, allowing easy access to educational materials and communication with teachers and classmates. His new independence also brought new challenges. Michael had to deal with bouts of insecurity and stress arising from new academic and social demands. Elizabeth witnessed how he sometimes struggled to communicate with other students, not all of whom understood his unique needs. However, despite the difficulties, each successful day added to their confidence. At the end of this first week in the dormitory, sitting in their room one evening and discussing the day, Michael told Elizabeth, "You know, I've never felt so independent. And it's all thanks to you." Elizabeth smiled in response, her eyes glistening with tears of happiness and pride. "We're doing this together, Mike. And we'll make it. This is just the beginning. After a month of studies, Michael began to socialize more actively, gradually overcoming his shyness. At university, he met other students who shared his interests in technology and programming. Spending time in their company helped him get used to interacting with different people, learning to engage in conversations and express his thoughts. Soon after, Michael decided to make his first independent trip to the nearby supermarket. This step was significant for him, as he had always relied on Elizabeth for such tasks. Before leaving, he nervously checked the contents of his bag. "Do you have everything, Mike?" Elizabeth asked, approaching him with a cup of coffee. "I think so. Shopping list, wallet, phone." Michael went through the items, making sure he hadn't forgotten anything. "Don't worry, you'll do fine," Elizabeth said confidently. "It's just a trip to the store. You know how to get there, right?" "Yes, I've been there with you a few times." "I remember the way." Michael tried to hide his nervousness, though his voice trembled. As Michael headed to the store, each maneuver with his wheelchair felt like a challenge. But the streets and sidewalks were accommodating, and he easily reached his destination. In the store, he slowly navigated the aisles, carefully selecting products from his list. When he asked a clerk for help to reach items on higher shelves, Michael felt his confidence growing. Upon returning home with a full bag of groceries, Michael could not hide his excitement. "Elizabeth, I did it," he exclaimed as he wheeled into the room. "I never doubted you would," Elizabeth hugged him. "You prove every day that you can do anything you want." Fortunately, at the university, thanks to a scholarship and affordable dormitory costs, Michael could fully concentrate on his studies. His expenses for food and medication were completely covered by his pension and scholarship, alleviating financial stress and allowing him to freely pursue his academic and personal goals. However, Elizabeth was still concerned about financial stability and her brother's health. She took on jobs at 2 different places. She spent one shift at the university library and her evenings at a local cafe. Despite the fatigue and workload, she remained hopeful of saving enough money for prosthetics for Michael, which he seemed to have stopped dreaming about. One evening, after work, Elizabeth found Michael working on his academic projects in the common room of the dormitory. "Aren't you asleep yet?" she asked in surprise, sitting next to him. "No, I have a big presentation tomorrow," Michael smiled, closing his laptop. "How was your shift?" "Busy as usual," Elizabeth sighed, massaging her tired shoulders. "You know, Mike, I'm still thinking about getting you prosthetics. I want you to be able to stop. I'm living a full life here at the university. Prosthetics aren't something I absolutely need. You're working so much, maybe you should slow down." "But I just want to help," Elizabeth seemed puzzled. "I've always helped you, that's my role, isn't it?" "Your role is to be happy. You deserve your own life, not just to take care of me." Michael took her hand. "Look at me, I'm really managing. You don't need to sacrifice your dreams for me. I'm just afraid that if I stop, something will go wrong." "I've always been scared for you," she admitted, looking into his eyes. "And I appreciate that, but you see, everything is going well. Allow yourself to take a break. We're together in this new world, and we both need to explore it, fully living our own lives." Michael smiled, trying to reassure her. "Okay, I'll try," Elizabeth said, though deep down she still harbored doubts. She looked at Michael, trying to find confirmation in his eyes. Her brother smiled, trying to instill confidence, but Elizabeth knew how deeply her fears and doubts were rooted. "I understand your fears, and they're completely normal," Michael said, supporting her. "But we both need to learn to trust each other in this process. I promise I'll tell you if things get really tough." Elizabeth nodded, trying to take in his words, but doubts still churned inside her. She understood that Michael was right, and that her constant care might become a burden for him, but letting go completely was incredibly difficult. Elizabeth sat in the corner of the cafe, tired from long hours of studying and working. Fatigue was evident in her eyes, and her hands automatically clutched her coffee cup as if seeking comfort in it. Occasionally, she sighed and flipped through the pages of her textbook, unable to focus on the text. At that moment, Nicholas, her classmate, approached her table. Elizabeth often caught his glances during lectures, and each time her heart involuntarily skipped a beat. He smiled hesitantly and asked, "Hi, Elizabeth. Are you here alone? Maybe we could have coffee together sometime." Elizabeth momentarily lost her composure, her cheeks slightly reddening. She quickly gathered herself and responded, "Hi, Nicholas. Thanks, but I think I need to focus on my studies." Nicholas nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. "I understand. Maybe another time then?" "Yes, maybe," Elizabeth said, already diving back into her books. Nicholas slowly walked away, and Elizabeth sighed, feeling her mood dip further. She knew she liked Nicholas, but the thought of making time for a personal life seemed impossible. At that moment, Michael rolled up to her table in his wheelchair. Seeing him, Elizabeth forced a smile, trying to hide her subdued mood. "Hey, I met some guys on campus today. They're really cool." Michael started enthusiastically. "New friends? You don't even know who they really are," she abruptly interrupted her brother. "You need to be more careful, Mike. The world isn't as safe as you think." Michael looked at his sister, stunned. "Why do you always assume the worst? They're really great guys." "Great? You're too trusting, Mike," she scoffed tiredly. Elizabeth sighed, realizing she didn't have the energy to continue this conversation. She touched her brother's hand. "I'm sorry. I guess I worry more than I should. I just want everything to be okay for you." Michael smiled, accepting her apology. "Thanks, sis. And don't worry, I've got everything under control." Elizabeth nodded and, standing up, slowly walked towards the exit of the cafeteria. All the pressure and responsibility she had carried for years suddenly became unbearable. Her irritation about caring for Michael mixed with Nicholas's unexpected offer to have coffee together. It seemed like such a tempting diversion from her daily life, yet it also reminded her that she was denying her own happiness for her brother's sake. But did he really need her to make that sacrifice now? The warm evening was filled with the usual sounds of the college town as Michael returned to the dormitory, full of impressions from the day. Elizabeth was already waiting for him, eager to hear about his classes, but Michael started with other news. "You know, I recently told you about meeting some guys from the course, and today they invited me to a party this Saturday," Michael announced joyfully, his eyes shining with excitement. Elizabeth immediately tensed up. Her brother had always been naive in his social expectations, and she felt that every new acquaintance harbored a potential threat. "Mike, are you sure that's a good idea?" she asked cautiously. "You know, people can be cruel, especially in those situations." Michael smiled, trying to alleviate her concerns. "They're actually really cool, and I feel like I can make friends with them. They're good guys. But why would they want to hang out with someone like—" She hesitated, not wanting to sound harsh, "someone in a wheelchair?" "What's the point, Mike? Sis, not everyone is like you think. I really like them, and I want to spend time with them," Michael said firmly. "They definitely want to make fun of him," Elizabeth thought gloomily, imagining the worst scenarios in her head. She looked at her brother, overwhelmed with mixed feelings, fear for his well-being and a desire to support his quest for independence. "Mike, you need to be careful. Not everyone is as kind as they seem at first glance," her voice conveyed mistrust. "Elizabeth, I'm an adult now, and I need to learn to live my own life. Can't you just support me in that?" Michael insisted, his tone showing his determination. "But that's irresponsible." Elizabeth suddenly flared up, unable to contain her indignation. "You think you're ready for this, but I know what the consequences could be. You're not seeing the whole picture. You can't always control me." Michael exclaimed, "I need to make my own choices. I need to grow and learn." "Grow and learn? By risking your health?" Elizabeth was clearly upset. "These people aren't your friends, Mike. They're just looking for a way to have fun at your expense. It's none of your business. Michael's voice trembled with anger. I'm tired of your constant supervision. I need to breathe, Elizabeth. So this is how you talk to me after everything I've done for you? Elizabeth was stunned by his words. Tears filled her eyes. I was trying to protect you because I love you, Mike. But if you think you can manage without me, then please. Maybe I can. Michael blurted out hastily, not fully realizing the weight of his words. A heavy silence hung in the room. Elizabeth stared at her brother in disbelief, shocked that the conversation had taken such a turn. All right, Mike. If you think you know better what you need, I won't interfere, she said quietly, drained by the tension and bitterness. With those words, Elizabeth left the room, leaving Michael alone with his thoughts and newfound, yet bitter, freedom. After the argument with Michael, Elizabeth was left alone with her thoughts and growing anxiety. She understood that her fears might be excessive, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her brother could be in danger. Deciding to act, Elizabeth began to look for the address of the party Michael was invited to. The process proved difficult. She started by calling every acquaintance she could remember. With each new call, she hoped to hear some specific information, but most calls ended in failure. Some knew nothing, others had only heard rumors. Desperation slowly overwhelmed her, but she didn't give up. Finally, after dozens of calls, one of the students she wasn't close with casually mentioned hearing about a party in a skyscraper downtown. Elizabeth quickly noted down the address and immediately headed there. As she approached the place, she felt fear grip her heart. The luxurious skyscraper stood before her like a monument to excess and prosperity. Lit by bright lights, it seemed both exceptional and unreachable. Elizabeth paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Apparently, my little brother was invited to a party by typical rich kids who can't live peacefully without picking on someone weaker and defenseless, a grim thought flashed through her mind. This idea made her feel even more helpless and alone. Forcing herself to move forward, Elizabeth approached the indicated entrance and her legs nearly gave way. Near a bench, there sat an empty wheelchair. Her brother's wheelchair. Without hesitation, Elizabeth rushed to it. The thought that this could be a sign of something terrible immediately sprang to mind. She began to scan the surroundings, casting quick glances in every direction, trying to catch any sign of her brother. But it was all in vain. Suddenly, male voices sounded from behind the nearby bushes. Leaving the wheelchair where it was, Elizabeth ran towards the sounds, her heart pounding wildly. She rounded the lush bushes and suddenly froze, stunned by what she saw. Beyond the bushes was a small sports court where a group of guys around a pull-up bar surrounded someone. Elizabeth couldn't believe her eyes. She stood unable to move, completely absorbed in shock at the sight. Among the group of young men, she recognized the silhouette of her brother Michael, who was hanging on the pull-up bar. All eyes were on him as Michael performed pull-ups. Encouraged by the count and supportive shouts of the surrounding guys, his face lit up with a pleased smile. Elizabeth couldn't believe her eyes. Seeing Michael look in her direction, Elizabeth instinctively wanted to hide or run away, but then Michael shouted something to the crowd, and a couple of people approached him to help him down from the bar to the special flooring of the court, giving him a chance to catch his breath. Elizabeth's shock quickly turned to surprise and pride for her brother. She slowly emerged from behind the bushes and approached Michael, who smiled as he met her gaze. Coming closer, Elizabeth struggled to find words to express her feelings. Mike, I don't even know what to say, she managed, feeling her eyes about to fill with tears. I was so scared for you, I thought Hey, don't worry, Michael smiled. Guys, let me introduce you to my sister, Elizabeth. She's probably the most caring person in my life, he said, introducing her. Each of the people present extended a hand or nodded in greeting, intensifying her emotional shock. One of the guys, a tall fellow with a friendly smile, spoke first. Hi, Elizabeth. Michael has told us a lot about you. We're just here to stretch a bit while waiting for the rest. A shorter guy next to him, with brightly red hair, chimed in enthusiastically. Yeah, we just thought it would be easier to leave the wheelchair at the entrance so it wouldn't get in the way here. Michael wanted to show us his muscles, so we helped him get to the pull-up bar. And he's really good at it, another guy added with a wide smile, pointing to Michael, who shyly turned his head away, overhearing their conversation. Standing among Michael's new friends, Elizabeth couldn't hold back tears that surged in a sudden wave of relief and realization. The hours spent in anxiety and anticipation suddenly took a completely different outcome, one she could not have foreseen. Tears streamed down her cheeks, reflecting all the emotions she had experienced, from fear to astonishment. Everyone around, noticing her state, exchanged puzzled looks and then began to reassure her. One of Michael's friends, a guy with kind eyes, stepped closer and placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," he said softly. "We're all friends here." Through tears, Elizabeth began to mutter apologies, trying to explain her behavior. She felt a deep guilt for her mistrust and fears, which turned out to be unfounded. "I was so afraid. I thought." Her voice trembled, and her words merged into an incoherent whisper. "I feel so foolish. Please forgive me." "There's nothing you need to apologize for," another young man said, coming closer. "We understand, you're just caring about your brother. That's normal." But Elizabeth couldn't let go of her feelings so easily. She questioned herself, now seeming so cruel. How could she allow her love and care to turn into overbearing guardianship? How could she not believe that others could see Michael as he truly was, smart, fun, and worthy of friendship? These thoughts swirled in her head as she slowly calmed down, realizing that sometimes fear must be released to see the reality. This was a lesson Elizabeth would always remember. Now, watching her laughing brothers surrounded by new friends, she realized that sometimes you just need to trust and let people prove their sincerity. Michael's friend skillfully and carefully helped him back into his wheelchair. Elizabeth, watching this process, marveled at how naturally it all happened. The guys lifted Michael, carefully seated him back, adjusted the armrests, and made sure he was comfortable. All this was done with such ease and naturalness as if it had always been this way. Michael laughed and joked with friends, and Elizabeth could not deny that he looked like a very happy and confident person. He looked like he truly belonged in that group. Michael had become a full member of this society, a society that recognized him for who he is, with his individuality and unique traits. Seeing this, Elizabeth felt her heart fill with a heaviness. She realized that the years spent caring for her brother had led her to distance herself from life. She hadn't made new acquaintances, pursued her own interests, constantly feeling anxiety and fear for Michael. Internally, she blamed herself for this, realizing that she had imposed her own fears on her brother, preventing him from living a full life. The strange irony of the situation was that Michael, despite all his physical limitations, had found a way to be happy and an active member of society, while she, healthy, was trapped by her inner demons. Her brother, who had been confined within the four walls of their home for many years, was now discovering a world he had only previously imagined. Elizabeth understood that her love and protection had turned into something terrible, restricting them both. She vowed to change this. Starting from this day, she would focus on her own life, becoming a sister to Michael, not a perpetual guardian. As Elizabeth stood, wiping her tears and trying to compose herself, one of Michael's friends, a guy named Tom, approached her with a smile. "Elizabeth, we're all really happy to see you here," he began. "Why don't you join us? The party is about to start and it's going to be fun." Elizabeth hesitated, still feeling embarrassed and guilty. "I don't know, she faltered, looking at Michael, who winked at her in support. "Please, stay," Michael chimed in. Michael's words made Elizabeth smile through her tears. She looked at the joyful faces around her and felt her tension begin to fade. "All right, I'll stay," she said, feeling her mood start to shift. "Great," exclaimed Tom. "Let's show Elizabeth how we know how to have fun." The party turned out to be truly lively and became a turning point not just for Michael, but for Elizabeth too, opening a new chapter in their lives where both could feel free and happy. Realizing that Michael could manage his own life and make decisions freed Elizabeth from the constant sense of responsibility for his well-being. She decided it was time to focus on herself. One of the first steps on this path was deciding to sign up for dance classes, something she had dreamed of since childhood. Dancing had always attracted her, but duties and endless care had left little time for hobbies. On her first day at dance classes, Elizabeth felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. It was a release not only for her body but also for her soul. "How did you like the class?" asked a guy standing next to her at the mirror after the lesson. Elizabeth turned around and was surprised to recognize Nicholas. "Nicholas? You dance too?" Her voice expressed joy and slight surprise. "Yes, I've been dancing for a couple of years. It's my passion," he smiled. "I saw you dance. You move beautifully." "Thank you," Elizabeth blushed. "I'm just starting, but I really like it. It's liberating. It's great that you found time for yourself. You always seemed so busy, always caring about something or someone," Nicholas said, not taking his eyes off her. "Yes, I've spent a lot of time caring for my brother. But now he's become more independent, and I decided it's time for me to live my life," Elizabeth spoke, feeling each word make her more confident in her decision. "That's great. Maybe after the next class, we could go for coffee?" "I'd like to get to know you better," Nicholas proposed, a bit nervously. Elizabeth smiled, feeling the excitement slowly replaced by inner peace. "I'd like that, Nicholas. Thank you." The university time was full of challenges and discoveries for Michael, but his persistence and determination bore fruit. He graduated with flying colors, and his life by then was noticeably different from what it had once been. Michael was no longer just a student in a wheelchair watched over by a caring sister. He had become a confident IT specialist whose skills and knowledge were highly regarded in both academic and professional circles. Over the years of study, Michael actively participated in a charity foundation aimed at supporting people with disabilities, becoming a voice for those who were previously unheard. His efforts and initiatives helped many gain faith in themselves and their abilities. Michael's personal life was also looking up. He met his future wife, Enid, at one of the charity events where she volunteered. Their relationship quickly grew into something more, and soon they found out they were expecting a child. Preparing for fatherhood became Michael's new passion. He enthusiastically engaged in the process of anticipating and planning for his family's future. Elizabeth watched the transformations in her brother's life with warmth and pride. The realization that Michael had gained full independence and happiness gave her confidence that all their trials and difficulties had not been in vain. She also found her happiness in dancing and new relationships with Nicholas, which allowed her to see the world around her anew. One autumn day, gathering with the family at Michael's graduation ceremony, Elizabeth reflected on the past and how often they faced difficulties that seemed insurmountable. Now, looking at her brother, successful, happy, and full of hope, she understood the deep meaning of their journey together. "Sometimes life gives you lemons that are unsuitable for lemonade," she thought. "Then why not add them to a pie?"
"All right, everyone's presentations are done," Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me and began to speak. "There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only." "Absolutely right." His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. "I'm leaving." After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick, is something wrong?" Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, "Get his boss here immediately." It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. "What is that idiot doing?" "All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next." Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. "If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you." I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. "Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize." Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. "What kind of training are you giving your subordinates?" Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed, I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry." Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." "Mike, what have you done?" Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.